chose not to be here.
Judge, can you hear me? Oh.
Yes, you saw it right. The judge actually walked out in the middle of the hearing after one of Blake Lively's old workers told a shocking story that almost made everyone in the courtroom have a heart attack. What started as a he said, she said fight about being mean at work just turned into a crazy survival story with scissors, bleach, and a locked closet. At this point, Blake isn't trying to defend herself anymore. She's accidentally admitting to new bad things every time someone talks. Now you might be wondering, how is Blake Lively's trial, which was supposed to start in 2026, already making big news in 2025? Well, get ready because what happened 2 days ago wasn't the real trial. It was something called a pre-trial hearing where they look at evidence. And trust me, it was messier than you can imagine. This was supposed to be a quiet day in court, the kind where both groups of lawyers calmly talk about their plans. No crazy media, no public talking, no scandal. Just the lawyers who defend Blake, the lawyers against her, a judge, and a few helpers looking at paperwork. That's it. Until it wasn't. The people there were lawyers from both sides. Blake Lively's fancy legal team on one side and lawyers for 5 people who used to work for her old lifestyle company called Preserve on the other side. The judge, called Honorable Curtis Yean Lennox, who has worked in courts for a long time, walked in with papers about the case and a strict plan. This wasn't a trial to decide if she was guilty. It was a special meeting to figure out when they would look for evidence, explain what people are accused of, and find any papers either side might have forgotten to share. And right there, that's where everything fell apart. Just minutes before the end, when the judge asked both sides for final explanations, a woman sitting in the audience, one of the people suing Blake, whose name is secret, stood up without being asked and told a shocking story that no one expected. She broke the court rules. She wasn't supposed to speak. Her own lawyers looked shocked and surprised. Looking very upset, she started telling about something that happened in 2015 that no one had written down before. It was during a company trip to Aspen for Blake's company Preserve. According to what she said, Blake Lively herself threw a wine glass across the room during a big fight about marketing deadlines. The glass supposedly hit the woman's shoulder and cut her badly. Hospital papers later showed she needed 6 stitches and her nerves were hurt.
And they were paid hush money apparently, and Leslie Sloan, Blake Lively's publicist, and Ryan Reynolds' publicist, helped bury this.
But here's the part that turned the courtroom upside down. The woman said Blake's team paid her $40,000 in hush money to stop her from making a formal complaint. They also made her sign a paper saying she couldn't talk about it, and they forced her to do it. She didn't name who told her this. She didn't have papers with her, but she did talk about Preserve's internal HR incident book, which by the way hasn't been given to the court yet. She also mentioned internal Slack messages where workers supposedly joked about Blake's bad temper. The courtroom froze. A court officer moved to take her away, but the judge, instead of telling everyone to be quiet, stopped everything. He turned to both groups of lawyers and asked the question that probably changed this whole case forever. Did either of you know about this incident or any other injuries caused by the defendant and choose not to tell the court about it? The room was silent. What happened next was like courtroom whiplash. Blake's defense team mumbled about evidence that didn't matter, while the prosecution started looking through their folders like they had just found buried treasure. Judge Lennox, a man known for staying calm, lost it. He slammed his gavel twice. He stood up and yelled at both legal teams for breaking court rules, slowing down the discovery process, and possibly hiding important facts on purpose. And just when we thought it couldn't get more crazy, he walked out in front of everyone. He didn't call for a break. He didn't say they would meet later. He stood up and said, "If this is the level of honesty I'm expected to work with, then you're wasting federal time. This is not Hollywood, it's federal court." And he left. So what does this mean? First, the hearing is officially stopped. The judge is checking both teams for contempt of court. This means if either side knowingly hid damaging evidence or let false statements into the record, they could be punished. Second, the court is thinking about opening up several parts of the Preserve workplace lawsuit. This includes internal messages, money records, and possibly medical files about multiple injuries that former workers got between 2013 and 2016. And third, the story about Blake Lively just changed from celebrity caught in a toxic workplace to possible person who caused workplace violence and tried to cover it up. Not a good look for someone trying to make themselves look like a victim of Hollywood's dark forces. To sum up, this wasn't a meltdown. It was a legal firestorm with more smoke than a PR company can put out. Blake Lively walked into that hearing as a worried co-founder. She left as someone who may now face being sued, witness tampering accusations, and possibly obstruction of justice, all before her actual trial even starts. But if you thought the wine glass incident was just another juicy footnote in an already big case file, think again, because the moment that victims stood up in court and started talking, this case changed from celebrity workplace drama to something far more scary: corporate wrongdoing, bribery, and possible criminal carelessness. The woman, still unnamed in the court papers, made it very clear that this wasn't about one incident. No, this was about an entire culture of manipulation built around Blake Lively's failed brand Preserve. You remember Preserve, right? That overpriced digital flea market that tried to sell farm jam and linen aprons as fancy living? The same company that closed under mysterious reasons just 2 years after it started? Yeah, that one. Well, according to this ex-employee, the collapse wasn't just because of bad business. It was supposedly caused by toxic internal practices, abuse of power, and a very planned use of legal silencing tactics. Here's what we now know. Employees were always underpaid, worked 60 to 80-hour weeks, and were regularly threatened with being fired if they questioned executive decisions, especially those involving budget cuts, branding failures, or Blake's increasingly strange behavior. That's the word she used, strange, and it gets worse. She claimed that several employees who either tried to quit or file HR complaints were given severance packages. That's a nice-sounding term for cash bribes tied to NDAs. In simple terms, hush money. Supposedly organized not just by PR managers, but with Blake's full knowledge and signature. Yes, actual documents with her initials supposedly exist. Whether they make it into evidence is a whole other storm waiting to happen. But let's go back to the most explosive part of her testimony, the Aspen dinner. We're talking about an executive dinner hosted during Preserve's 2015 winter planning retreat. According to her sworn statement, the team was discussing a failed partnership with an influencer brand when tensions got high. Blake, reportedly angry about missed press targets, supposedly threw a full glass of red wine across the table. It hit the woman's right shoulder and broke, slicing through her shirt and leaving a cut near her collarbone. 6 stitches, nerve bruising, and trauma. She was rushed to a local clinic under a fake name, billed as a kitchen accident. The records were hidden. Her contract was changed. 2 weeks later, she was handed a $40,000 settlement check in exchange for signing an NDA, supposedly pushed by Blake's personal legal consultant. Intentional harm, forcing someone to do something. The courtroom didn't need to say it. The meaning was clear. You could hear a pin drop. The judge didn't interrupt. No bailiff moved. It was that moment in every scandal where the air changes. The media team in the back row typing like their lives depended on it. The prosecution's junior associates whispering, clearly stunned. And Blake, according to someone seated 3 rows back, she looked pale, like she knew what was coming next. Because this wasn't an accusation. This was a federal violation waiting to be made official. Workplace injury hiding, witness silencing, possible obstruction. And this was only the second chapter of the day. But just when we thought Blake Lively's legal headache couldn't get any messier, enter Bernie, or as he's now known in court documents, Bernard Collins, executive producer, creative director, and apparently the walking HR violation behind Preserve's closed doors. Originally, the story positioned Bernie as the bad guy in the story. You know, the cliché power-hungry exec accused of sexually harassing junior employees, while management supposedly didn't know a thing. For months, that's how the media sold it. Bernie was the fire, and Blake was just standing near the smoke. Except that version of the story just blew up, because new testimonies from multiple former employees, now admitted into the record after the court's meltdown last week, show that Blake wasn't just aware of Bernie's behavior. She was supposedly encouraging it, making fun of complaints behind closed doors, and strategically protecting him because he made the company look creative and edgy. Let that sink in. This wasn't about not knowing. This was about image management. Courtroom Exhibits 27 and C30 include screenshots from internal Slack threads, messages between Blake and Bernie where she called a junior employee's harassment complaint overblown sensitivity. And here comes the quote, "Keep her on the payroll. She photographs well. Good optics." Yes, really, good optics. Another message shows her joking about a staffer quitting over Bernie's vibes and writing, "She didn't get the culture. We're not Whole Foods." And while her attorneys tried to argue the messages were taken out of context or not, it doesn't look good. Because what those screenshots reveal is a leader not just ignoring workplace abuse, but possibly using it for branding purposes. But wait, Bernie's side made it even worse. In a rare statement outside court, Bernie's lawyer Calvin Dre spoke to the press and dropped a bomb of his own. He claimed Blake was not only involved, but that her office organized narrative control when allegations began brewing internally in 2016. According to him, his client, now apparently flipping to save himself, was told to keep certain liabilities on contract for appearance's sake, and that Blake's team handled any potential leak by buying silence. You know what that means. Bernie might testify against Blake, and that changes everything. Because now the case isn't about one bad man in the company. It's about a system supposedly created by Blake herself. A toxic workplace culture where manipulation, gaslighting, and selective silence weren't accidents. They were policy. We've officially shifted from a civil labor dispute to what legal experts are now calling a corruption web. And the prosecution, they're loving it. The minute those chat logs were verified and submitted, their tone changed. They're no longer just defending a group of mistreated employees. They're preparing a case that could potentially lead to felony charges if Blake is proven to have covered up harassment knowingly. The question isn't whether Bernie's guilty. It's how long Blake was protecting him and how far she went to keep the brand's image sparkling while her staff silently crumbled. And just when that fire started to rage, another bomb dropped. This time from Blake's personal life. Because of course it did. If there's one thing that could make this courtroom scandal even more dramatic, it's Taylor Swift. Yes, her. Because according to newly leaked texts, Blake Lively tried to pull her longtime friend into the mess, and when Taylor said no, Blake lost it. Here's how it unraveled. As the pressure around Preserve mounted, Blake supposedly reached out to Taylor privately, not just for emotional support, but to publicly defend her in the press. In simple terms, Blake wanted Taylor to make a statement painting her as an unaware CEO who had nothing to do with the workplace abuse. And Taylor wisely said no. She reportedly said she wasn't in a position to comment on a legal matter and that it wouldn't be fair to the women involved. Sounds diplomatic, right? Apparently not for Blake, because what followed next was a chain of private text messages that were later leaked via encrypted backup logs now under review as admissible evidence. In them, Blake tells Taylor, "After a decade, you owe me. If you walk away now, don't expect me to fix what happens to your name when I speak up. I defended you in rooms that would have buried you. And finally, this friendship lives or dies by loyalty." Taylor's response? One sentence. That's not how loyalty works. The texts were supposedly leaked by a former Preserve marketing executive who had access to Blake's PR coordination team and was recently subpoenaed by the court. He claims the messages were being used by Blake's handlers to pressure Taylor into a statement as a last-ditch PR move before media coverage turned fully against Blake. So now the courtroom isn't just dealing with legal fallout, it's dealing with a celebrity implosion. The judge, reportedly already angry from the Bernie scandal, paused proceedings once the messages were brought up and stated on record that the defense was attempting to use public perception as legal leverage. That's not just unethical, it borders on witness manipulation, depending on how the messages were sent and shared. And the public? Oh, they noticed. The moment the Swift Lively texts hit social media, Twitter was on fire. Swifties flooded the timeline with comparisons to past betrayals, calling it the ultimate snake reveal. Even neutral commentators began questioning just how far Blake was willing to go to salvage her narrative. Because here's what it revealed. This wasn't just a case about a company or even a CEO. It's about someone supposedly so desperate to protect their reputation they were willing to throw friendships, victims, and legal protocol under the bus. And for Taylor Swift, someone notoriously protective of her public image, the betrayal wasn't just personal, it was strategic. Blake supposedly tried to use Taylor's credibility as a shield, and when it didn't work, she weaponized the friendship like a legal bargaining chip, which, to be honest, might be the most damning detail yet. Because you can explain away legal documents, you can spin court filings, but you can't unsend a threat to your best friend. This case is no longer confined to legal journals. It's bled into pop culture, power politics, and personal morality. And if this is how far Blake went behind closed doors, imagine what else is still waiting to surface. Now, if there was ever a moment where the Blake Lively case crossed the point of no return, it was here. The courtroom wasn't just tense anymore, it was boiling. And the pot boiled over the minute the judge caught Blake's legal team playing hide and seek with actual federal evidence. You see, for weeks the defense had been pushing this fantasy that Blake had no knowledge of settlements paid out to former Preserve employees. According to her sworn testimony, there were no private payments made to silence or settle disputes. A very clean and polished statement. Too clean, as it turns out. Because when Judge Lennox demanded the full financial documentation of Preserve's operating years, the defense handed over a tidy redacted report that conveniently left out all the numbers the prosecution was specifically looking for. Key sections were blacked out, names were missing. Entire pages were practically invisible. Now, redactions in corporate trials aren't illegal by themselves, but when the same exact documents appear in unredacted form from a whistleblower on the prosecution's side, and those documents show 5 separate hush money payments totaling over $200,000, we've officially entered obstruction territory. The judge didn't even try to stay composed at that point. He asked the defense to explain why their version of the document didn't include any mention of those payments. Their response? A bland excuse about clerical discretion, which might have worked in a fashion scandal, but absolutely doesn't fly in a courtroom, especially not one where the federal gavel is swinging. This wasn't just sloppy, this was calculated. Submitting altered financial records in a federal hearing is grounds for contempt, and Blake's legal team was suddenly facing that exact reality. But it didn't stop there. The prosecution hit back harder, revealing that 2 of the original Preserve complainants who had already submitted testimonies were mysteriously contacted by Blake's people after their court submissions. And not just contacted, we're talking friendly check-ins, offers of image consulting, NDA renegotiations, and in one case, the sudden appearance of a social media reputation agency offering to scrub old tweets. None of this was random. It was an orchestrated attempt to manage witnesses. Soft bribery masked as damage control, legal manipulation pretending to be PR. Judge Lennox slammed his gavel, stood up, and for the second time in 2 weeks, stormed out of the courtroom. His parting shot. This is not a sandbox for celebrity image control. This is a court of law. And what you've brought in here is an intentional mockery of legal due process. And just like that, he vanished through the chamber doors, leaving a room full of stunned lawyers, exhausted reporters, and one actress whose career was unraveling faster than the press could type. The consequences were immediate. Legal analysts began speculating that Blake's entire team could be sanctioned. There were whispers of California State Bar investigations, ethics complaints, potential criminal referrals. Because this wasn't about defending a celebrity anymore. It was about protecting the integrity of the court. And at this point, Blake's defense looked less like a legal team and more like a PR operation pretending to follow the law. The redacted documents, the tampered witnesses, the blatant contradictions, it wasn't just shady. It was strategic. It was deliberate. And it was caught. Outside the courtroom, the fallout hit like a digital tsunami. The moment news broke of the redacted documents and the judge's walkout, the internet exploded. Within an hour, hashtags like #BlakeExposed and #JusticeForPreserve victims were trending worldwide. And this time, it wasn't just Twitter trolls or gossip blogs. Verified accounts, journalists, former co-stars, even low-key celebrities were chiming in. And the tone? It was brutal. Blake Lively, once seen as the down-to-earth, effortlessly chic Hollywood sweetheart, was now being rebranded by the public as a manipulative, image-obsessed tyrant who supposedly built her empire on intimidation and NDAs. And gone were the Instagram comments calling her queen. Now it was liar, fraud, and the female Weinstein with better lighting. And while that might sound extreme, let's be honest, the evidence coming out didn't exactly paint her as misunderstood. It painted her as someone who, at best, turned a blind eye to abuse and, at worst, actively ran a machine that punished victims and gaslit truth-tellers. And now it's clear. Blake Lively's fall from Hollywood's golden girl to courtroom cautionary tale is no longer a twist. It's the final act.